thank you, everyone. I am so happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to share part of the work I've been doing. Um, for a few years now, I started when I was a graduate student at UC Davis, and now I am expanding it as a postdoctoral researcher with USDA ARS. Um, and I'm in a journey of understanding what is a healthy soil for wine grape production. Soil health, we define soil health as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And like Devin explained, um, you know, in some of the functions of a healthy soil are having biological activity, carbon mineralization and storage, nutrient cycling, enhancing and protecting the soil structure, and improving water cycling, such as infiltration and water holding capacity. Um, so these are all interconnected and form basically are in very general terms. It inform us of what is a healthy soil. But something that I've been assessing and I have been noticing when engaging, I work a lot with the wine growing communities, with wine growers, viticulturists, and different stakeholders in the wine industry. I'm sorry, different roles in the wine industry. Is that this still remains vague for them for wine grape production. And there seems to be a connection to soil fertility that it makes them ask how relevant might soil health be if it's not aligned with the wine grape production goals of not necessarily increasing yields. So in addition to, questioning, how relevant are these assessments that are mostly in the past decades have been mostly conducted in other regions of the country that have other cropping systems like annual cropping systems and different weather, different challenges. There are questions about, the challenges that we have here especially in California, but I know this is very relevant to many areas of the US West Coast, um, such as having severe droughts and extreme heat and also heavy and prolonged rainfall events that seem to uh, change drastically, and it seems harder to predict with time. So we have the challenges of understanding exactly what is soil health for wine grape production and how can we manage soil and build a healthy soil that not only supports the production goals, but that it helps with resilience to these events. So that led me to my question, which is a healthy soil for whom and for what? Um, for the past decades, we've done great progress in soil health research.
Mhm.
Um, but we have some things that we can improve, right? Currently, we have different conceptualizations and approaches between farmers and researchers. That seems to be one of the many barriers that there could be when thinking about adopting soil health practices. And what we need is then that collaboration, that having more regionally and outcome relevant soil health indicators and assessments. Um, and for that, we need to work together and go from management to assessment to outcomes. And working together, it's what my research focuses on. I've been working particularly in California, but this is applicable to other wine-grown regions as well. Um, with all of my experience engaging, connecting with different wine-growing communities, um, I believe that including growing participation in research will allow us to assess challenges needs and conduct more relevant research that will ultimately help with building trust that can lead to informed action. So I think that we need to work together more to study and understand soil health from the roots. Okay, so that led us to design and conducted this project that you can scan the QR code. It's open access. And this project, we wanted to understand perceptions and attitudes about soil health, particularly with wine grape growers. This study was conducted in the Napa Valley region, and we believe that understanding perceptions is very important because it ultimately helps us understand what could lead to action, to decision making, to adopt or not adopt a practice. Um, and it's interesting because this is something that's relevant to many things in life, not just in agriculture and soil health, but even us in our daily lives when we need to buy something or we're planning a trip, we're thinking about making a decision. Oftentimes, one of the first things we do is we go and check reviews, right? If we're going to buy something before spending the money, which spending the money or buying it is the action, then we go and check perspectives of that product to see, do people like it? Um, do they don't like it? Does it work? Does it not work? So essentially, that's what we wanted to do here is just understand from the ground up, where are we at? And today I'll talk about essentially um, needs assessments in two different ways that we conducted. I'll be talking about how communities are visualizing or interpreting soil health for wine grape production qualitatively and quantitatively. In this study, we conducted interviews to assess knowledge or awareness, perceptions, attitudes, identify barriers, motivations um, for adopting or maintaining practices, specifically soil health practices. And ultimately, we want to identify what are some research and outreach opportunities um, for related to soil health in vineyards. Okay, so here I would like to briefly explain our data collection and analysis process for the interviews. This was a highly collaborative process. We worked with the RCD, the Napa RCD, the Napa Valley Grapes Growers Association. Um, we worked with scientists from ARS, UC Davis, extension specialists from A&R, and different professionals and the wine growing community to recruit people to develop the interviews. We conducted the interviews through Zoom and phone because those were the days where we were in COVID times. So, but it worked great. We were able to have amazing conversations. We transcribed and later conducted something called a thematic analysis, where we gathered the most important keywords and ideas and themes from the conversations. And then we did an application of social theories to understand where are we at in terms of adoption potential or changing practices, and then also of potential action, right? What might be driving some of these um, perceptions and attitudes? And then, of course, we interpret in the context of our system. So this is a summary here. You can see a word cloud. We asked our community to define what is soil health for their goals, and the goals here are um, staying within yields, a range of yields, not necessarily increasing yields, because the goal is to have vine balance and produce high grape quality. So we are not looking to have big green plants. We want to have balanced vigor, stay in a have a controlled vigor that allows for a controlled growth of the berries. Um, and so when we were talking about what is so health for wine grape production in this region of Napa Valley, here the bigger words or phrases are the terms that were mentioned the most. Um, and here you can see in green, well, the colors don't mean anything. This was just automatic from the R when I was doing the figure. Healthy vines was one of the uh, main keywords that were mostly mentioned. We had also good structure, nutrient cycling in the context of balanced nutrients, not high nutrient levels. A healthy soil supports wine production, their goals uh, of berry quality. A healthy soil has biodiversity, soil organic matter. WHC is water holding capacity. Here, C is carbon sequestration. Healthy cover crop or natural vegetation. No erosion, infiltration, and here, small but important resiliency to the changing weather patterns. And here's a little bit more context. So I briefly discussed, that the goal in this community was to achieve vine balance, that balance between the vegetative and the reproductive growth in the vines. Um, and for this, there was a high emphasis on soil texture and soil balance, soil water management as well. Some of the challenges discussed were the perceived increased cost and water needs if they adopted more practices for building healthy soils. And we discussed, I asked, what are some of the topics and informations that you think you need to maybe be able to do take decisions to change practices to build healthy soils. Um, there was very the majority of the growers answered that they needed more specific and practical information on that connection between the soil health indicators and like the levels, ranges, numbers, and how it relates to um, uh, essentially the berry quality parameters. So they want to see that connection of the soil and their production goals. Now here I wanted to understand, where are we at in terms of willingness to adopt practices or not adopt practices, right? Um, so we use the diffusion of innovation theory for this, and this theory just helps us understand the different communities and their willingness to adopt new practices, or this is also used for marketing. It also can be applied to like willingness of people to buy a new product, which is really cool. So we have the innovators group in the left, and as we go to the right, there's going to be more resistance to changes. We had 3 growers in the early adopters, and this group is characterized by being visionaries and enthusiasts. And I'll explain a bit more. I'll give more examples soon. We have 4 growers in the early majority group, which are willing to adopt practices, but after seeing more evidence. And then we had 9 growers in the late majority group, which it's a group that's more cautious. And most growers were cautious and resistant to changes in soil management practices due to the perceived economic risks, potential negative effects in the vine balance on the grape quality, and a strong association of soil health with soil fertility, which I think is very important context for the next slides. And here are some examples. The early adopters, some of the motivations were personal. Um, they believe it's the right thing and it's their responsibility, so we don't have to do much convincing. Um, then the early majority group in the middle, some motivations were scientific proof and regulations, like if there are any ordinances, then they have to comply with them. And the late majority group, which is the most resistant to changes, um, regulatory compliance, which is basically like regulations, if there are ordinances or laws that require you to do a practice, they would do it. And proof that there is some sort of support to the production goals, um, or proof that there is a high return on investment. Um, and then some of the challenges, again, I'm going really fast because you can always ask me more in detail. I just want to give a summary of this whole study. Some of the challenges were, like I mentioned briefly before, lack of information for their specific system and goals, that link between soil health and grape quality, costs, of course. For instance, applying compost. Many growers mentioned, like, I would like to apply compost because I understand the benefits, but it's very difficult because it's very expensive. And the logistics to apply it and the labor it might require, depending on your vineyard, it's also challenging. And then no-till was also described as challenging, especially in organic systems. Because, well, weed control is difficult. But also, I forgot to add here is pest control for like gophers and ground squirrels is also a big challenge in no-till soils. Okay, so, and I did the study in Paso Robles and Lodi as well. And for today, I was able to uh, provide some preliminary results from Paso Robles, and Lodi is still in progress. But in Paso Robles, we're seeing very similar trends in terms of the definitions of soil health. There's a big emphasis in texture, infiltration. The soil biology was also heavily mentioned, organic matter, healthy vines, vigor control. So we're seeing these trends of having interpretations of a healthy soil being one that allows for the vigor control needed to achieve high grape quality. Um, it's self-sustaining and requires minimum inputs. Um, it has good infiltration, good structure, but also allows for adequate water holding capacity. And some of the challenges were very similar also to Napa, compost, coast, pest management like gophers, especially no-till, labor, logistics and costs, water limitations, especially in the eastern side of Paso Robles, where water is way more limited, um, among others. So this is basically this interviews process is a way to understand where we're at. And we're seeing that the interpretation of soil health very much related to the concept of vine balance, having a balanced soil so that we can balance vines. Now, we wanted to take the needs assessment further and go from interviews to the field. And we wanted to have a collaborative approach. We wanted to see in this study that was recently published a month ago, and you can scan the QR code and it's open access. We wanted to see in this study, we wanted to quantify the perspectives on soil health and identify then what are the indicators that are more associated with an ideal soil for their goals, right? Okay, and this is the design. First, and then number one here, this is what we just discussed about the interviews. We had the interviews process, And after the interviews, we went to the field and we continued to have conversations, but we wanted to identify two contrasting soils um, that growers perceived, one that growers perceived as ideal and healthy for their goals, and another that is challenging or unhealthy for their goals. So there is a subjectiveness to this study, but we believe that it was a great exploration of further understanding what is a healthy soil. How can we quantify a healthy soil from growers' perspectives? So a healthy soil basically was rated as one that had good infiltration, adequate nutrient levels, so not high or super low, and that allowed to vigor, control, and land balance. And the opposite was for the challenging soil. Um, it had poor soil water infiltration from their perspectives, right? These are all from perspectives, and later we're going to see what are we getting. Excessive nutrient levels because many of the growers in this region, especially in the valley, struggled with poor infiltration, accumulation of water, and then having excessive vine vigor. And we want to control that vigor. So that's why. So those were some of the main reasons why these were challenging. And after we went to the field, we sampled and conducted many soil health tests related to carbon cycling, nutrient cycling, particularly nitrogen and soil chemical properties. Water cycling here, by what I mean here is physical properties like infiltration, compaction, tests. And then microbial diversity, I won't be going in detail into the microbial diversity today because that will take me like another hour. But um, we measured phospholipid fatty acids, which gives us information of the fungal and bacterial communities biomass. And we also did like DNA sequencing of fungi and prokaryotes communities. And for carbon, nutrient, and water cycling, the indicators we measured were almost the same as Devin just discussed, like mineralizable carbon, um, available nitrogen, total carbon, among others. And you'll see them now. Okay, here is our map of our data collection and a bit of information of our data analysis. Most of the vineyards were in Napa County, and there were a few that were in Sonoma, but very close to Napa. So that's why I just generalized and say Napa County. And we try to cover as much area as we could. We ended up sampling 32 sites up to 20 centimeters of depth, which is 8 inches, I believe. And we sample under the vines and the alleys or the tractor rows. And we did our linear mixed models, analysis of variance, further post hoc analysis to see what means are different. And we also did a random forest prediction model to understand how good of our predictors are these grower ratings of ideal and challenging soils. And also like what parameters emerge are the most important using grower rating as a predictor. Okay, so here are some results in very summarized, and I'm happy to answer more questions. I want to focus it only on the challenging versus ideal factor. We saw that in Napa, we saw results we weren't expecting. We saw higher total carbon, POXY, which is the oxidizable carbon, aggregate stability, total nitrogen, pH, electrical conductivity, and clay content were higher in the challenging soils. And then we saw that the ideal soils had higher dissolved organic carbon and silt content. Now remember, this is from growers' perspectives, right? And now we did some further analysis and we saw that there is a strong influence of texture and tillage, which makes sense because, if we are seeing higher like clay content, which was highly mentioned, clay content was highly discussed in the interviews in Napa, because many of the soils were clay loams, um, where they had very poor infiltration. And of course, clay content, the higher the grade clay content, then the higher carbon and aggregate stability we're gonna have. It's like it's more automatic because of clay's capacity to hold into the carbon organic matter particles, and the charges allows to cement and form those aggregates more strongly compared to soils that have more silt or sand, right? So we believe that um, texture is it's a very important soil indicator or soil property to wine growers. And we believe that it's also because of the concept of the terroir, right? When we talk about soils with the wine community, texture is the first soil indicator um, that gets discussed because of that association of the soil mineralogy and the soil conditions with the wine. Here, in the random forest, we just see that uh, it's very similar trends to what we got into in our statistical analysis of texture particles, electrical conductivity, carbon, pH, aggregate stability being important indicators from that differ between the grower ratings. All right. And I think I have 10 minutes if I'm not mistaken. Let me check the chat real quick.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, cool. Feel free to jump in. Um, okay, so I also want to show some preliminary results from the Paso Robles and the Lodi areas because each area has their own challenges and perspectives, right? In Napa, we have more rain. We have more of clay soils. And then in the Paso Robles area, we don't have as much rain, although it might depend on if you're in the west, like very close to the coast, or in the east side. But still, there's not as much water as we have in the northern coast area. And then in Lodi, it's in the northern side of the central valley. And there are also more water limitations compared to Napa Valley. Um, oops, what's going on? Okay. Paso Robles, challenging soils had higher carbon, mineralizable carbon, total carbon, mineralizable carbon, pH, EC, and silt content. It's similar to Napa, somewhat similar to Napa, and the ideal soils had higher nitrogen. And now the Lodi soils had higher dissolved organic carbon, total nitrogen, clay content, and silt content. And I remember from my notes as I was revising yesterday that many of the struggles in the Lodi vineyards that we sampled had to do more with compaction. There was like very high compaction from the discussions we had with growers. So it could be something that results from a higher clay content. And the ideal soils, interestingly, had higher potentially mineralizable nitrogen, ammonium, mineralizable carbon, and sand content. So we see that we have different regions that have different challenges. We're seeing some different trends as well. We have similarities in terms of some of them with the texture, but then what is ideal in some regions might not be ideal in others. And I think that this is very important information because it helps us guide our next steps in terms of research. How are we going to approach research? And then especially outreach, thinking, how are we discussing soil health, and what are the some of the most important topics that we should focus on when we are giving talks, right? When we're trying to share information. Okay. Then I analyzed this data, and these are preliminary results. I also wanted to see, across regions, what are some of the main trends that we can see accounting for in-region variability and across-region variability. We're able to see that a total carbon, mineralizable carbon, and electrical conductivity are higher in the challenging soils, which is just something different to what we expect in the context of typical soil health. And another interesting result, I didn't go much in detail into this, but it's just something that, because cover cropping under the vine and or only in the alleys, it was a question that emerged a lot. So we also looked at, how do soil health indicators look in the tractor rows or the alleys versus under the vine, and we saw consistently higher levels of carbon, nitrogen, and microbial biomass from the phospholipid fatty acids. That tells us like the biomass of the different organisms. They were consistently higher in the tractor rows, and everyone that we worked with did had cover crops or natural resident vegetation in the tractor rows, and the alleys were bare. Again, it is more complex than that because there are many other management practices that, you know, we're not evaluating. This is a trend that I wanted to highlight because it was asked a lot in our interviews. And this is a random forest just to confirm similarities of the texture indicators and electrical conductivity and pH and carbon indicators that seem to be important when we use grower ratings as a predictor. Okay, just a brief summary of what we learned. Let me see how I'm in time. Okay, so we see that especially from the Napa paper that we published, um, wine growers' conceptualization of soil health might differ from soil health paradigm. And this is something that there is no right or wrong. Like there is no one to point to in terms of who's right, who's wrong, or anything like that. This is just for us to assess where are we at, what are we thinking, and then brainstorm how do we move forward in terms of research. We saw that the perceptions or understanding or interpretation of soil health is strongly linked to perceptions of water management for vine balance and grape quality outcomes. Um, and of course, we need more collaborative soil health research uh, that guides our that can better provide guidance, in in our studies. What I want to say here is that we when we include different communities in research, we're going to be able to have a better resolution of the issues and find solutions, right? So now this study allowed us to assess where are we at and can guide future research to help answer more questions and provide more relevant guidance. Um, And so I want to give a brief summary of what I'm doing now is we're going more in depth into understanding the link of the soil microbiology and soil health in vineyards. I'm currently working in ARS on understanding the functional role of microbial diversity using techniques like metagenomics and metabolomics to see who's there and what they might be doing and how it relates to soil health indicators. And I would like to understand, how does that functional role uh, shift between the perceptions of growers of soil health and management practices? And soil biology was something that came up. Many growers asked about. They requested more information. We need to know more about what should we look for in terms of the soil microbes. All right, and so thank you so much for the opportunity to share part of my work. I hope it was helpful, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Noely. Do we have any questions in the crowd? Okay, so Noely, there are some questions on the Q&A, and since you are online, you can be able to see them, but I'll say them here. So one of them is, were there any feedback in the survey about weeds and herbicide avoidance or something related to soil health with wine vineyards?
Let me see. Weeds or herbicide avoidance, like potentially switch into like organic systems. I think that many growers were avoiding um, herbicides and pesticides. There seemed to be a strong interest in, I have my notes here from interviews I was reviewing. There's a strong interest in obtaining organic or regenerative or sustainable certifications. Um, so yes, many growers mentioned that they were avoiding pesticide or herbicide use.
And so that was in the survey?
That's in the interviews, yeah.
The interview is great. And then have you interviewed a grower that was happy with the vine vigor and wine quality and then sampled the soil and asked about the practices so we can learn which practice can be used and avoid inventing the wheel for other growers? And that question is on the Q&A if you want to reread it.
Hmm. I have my notes here because I did like 45 interviews.
I get it. I've been answering questions with my notes online, so.
So everyone was doing cover crops. Everyone didn't have an issue with having cover crops in the alleys. Um, there were some questions with no-till, with the effectiveness of no-till in terms of pest management, but also water. Like there were many questions about no-till reducing available water, which was very interesting. So I think that no-till was one of the practices that was least common among growers. And the majority of growers did some sort of light disking because it was just too difficult to go completely to no-till. But I don't think there is a specific formula. Um, Everyone was very unanimously supportive of cover crops, which was great to hear. Difficult with no-till. Compost teas was very interesting that many growers were saying that was working for them, but that's something I need to dig into the literature and read more because it's not like a stable product. It depends on who makes it. And so I think that's something that I don't dare to say, oh, they said that compost teas are working, so you should do them. I don't dare to say that. But that's something that emerged. So if you were wondering, that's something that people are doing, and it's getting like a lot of popularity.
And I'm sure you may have said this, but what was the acreage range of these different vineyards?
We had a large acreage range from 6 acres to like big growers and producers, like more than 50. Um, yeah. There are some limitations of the study in terms of, there were some things I couldn't account for because this became too complex, like thinking of like rootstocks, specifics of the fertigation. I know everyone did drip irrigation, but some people did deficit irrigations and others didn't. So I know there are some limitations, but for now, what we wanted to see is just, how are we thinking about soil health and then how can we move forward? And I think I was really excited to see Dr. Devin's presentation because it seems like many of the current efforts are really going to be well received by the wine growing community because it's very relevant.
So a lot of our growers here have hundreds of acres of vineyards. So how feasible are some of these practices for the larger scale operations?
Yeah, I think it depends on your resources. Like I'm thinking of equipment and budget. Cover cropping seems to be uh, an easy practice to adopt in terms of costs. From the interviews that we had, everyone was able to do them, and people were happy with the cover crops in the alleys. Um, so keeping the soil covered as one of the pillars of soil health with living roots, it seems to be feasible. One of the practices that seemed to be very feasible for the communities I worked with was cover cropping. And then reducing tillage to the best of your ability, depending on, if your cropping, like if you're organic or not organic. Compost application, if you have the budget, is always great compost. And then another practice that has been growing and that people are liking from the people I worked with is sheep grazing. So that's another practice that's growing and people are liking to control the cover crops. And to have a little bit of that organic fertilizer. Um, Let me see. I'm also looking at the chat.
Are there any other questions in person? Okay. So I think for the online questions, there's a couple we can leave open and you can go through, Noely, and answer those, type them in. That'd be great. 'Cause I'm sure some of them are very interview specific, so you can use those notes for that. And then if you're going to stay on and anyone else has questions, we'll type them in for you. Otherwise, if you don't mind, we'll give them your contact information and they can reach out. So for now, we have a 10-minute break. So we'll just pause here. For those on the webinar, we'll resume around 2:30. Everyone here, we have snacks in the back. Come visit the booths, stretch your legs, and then we'll get up and going on the cover crop and weed management session.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Noely.